become older that when God gave me my soul at conception and made me an American citizen, it was a unique blessing. And coming with that blessing was a responsibility to be sure that others could see in me what God has done for me and what it will do and what it's done for our nation. So from my standpoint, I'm here today to charge our administration, as I'm certain they will do, to continue the proclamation that the day of prayer may be every first Thursday of May as it has been in the past, and I think that will continue, and that we use all the efforts that we can with the very best and brightest lawyers to challenge this decision that's been made by one judge.
And now what I'm going to do is ask our members if they would come up, and rather than me taking time to introduce each one of them, I'm going to ask them to come up here, state their name, the state they're from, take about 30 seconds to tell you why this is important to them. And why don't we just start here. Phil, since you're on the end, why don't you come up first?
Thanks very much. Phil Rowe from the 1st Congressional District of Tennessee. And I know certainly prayer is important to everyone here. We have a prayer breakfast every Thursday morning at 8 o'clock for Democrats, Republicans. And I know what we did before we had the historic vote on health care. For the first time in 130 years, we met in the rotunda of the Capitol and we prayed together. And I think that spoke volumes to me. I left that day feeling better. It has empowered me, and as a physician, I certainly have used prayer many times when a person's life was out of my hands. And it's hard for me to conceive that one person could turn over the will of over 300 million people, the Congress and the President and the history of this country. And certainly I pray that we restore this day and this one judge is overturned.
Well, I certainly appreciate being able to join all of my colleagues here today, and I assume that Judge Crabb is probably graduated from law school, but I suggest she go back to high school history and get a little bit of a sense of where we came from as a nation. If you go back to one of the early groups that came, we called them the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims came with a vision and a dream for a new country. They came with the idea that they were going to, among other things, separate civil government from church government. They never thought of the idea of taking God out of anything or out of any type of government. But they got that idea out of the Bible, and they were thought to be kooks by the English citizens that they had left behind. But they started with that whole idea of the Bible being central to things, but they used it as a pattern to separate civil and church government. When we go forward in history a little bit, you come to a little tidbit. We just celebrated the 18th of April. That was the day that started the War of Independence. About 2 weeks before that, the governor of Connecticut had called the state of Connecticut to a day of fasting and prayer for the people in Boston. He scheduled that day, the 18th of April in 75. The very U.S. Constitution, which was finally ratified in this country, George Washington called the nation to a day of prayer, which we called the first Thanksgiving. And so the very first event to ratify the U.S. Constitution, we had this day of prayer. So I recommend we send the judge back to high school history and we move forward. Thank you.
Robert Adderholtz, representing the 4th Congressional District of Alabama. Let me say it's an honor to be here with my colleagues this afternoon, and what a turnout we have here, not only of members, but on both sides of the aisle who really feel strongly about this issue. I had a group of over 100 high school students on the floor of the House of Representatives this morning, and I had an opportunity to talk with them and point out some of the aspects about this country and where we've come from and hopefully where we're going. And one thing that I pointed out is the fact that the Founding Fathers, they did not want to impose religion on anyone. And I think everyone standing behind me would agree that imposing religion on anyone was not the intent of the Founders. However, acknowledging God was something they thought was very important. And if you see the writings from their personal letters, you look at the men who wrote the documents of the Constitution, you'll see that they clearly felt very strongly that this nation must acknowledge God for those who wanted to, and make sure that it was available for anybody in this country who wanted to come together in prayer. So again, as it's been rightly pointed out, this legislation talks about May. There's nobody imposing anything on anyone, but again, acknowledging God is something the Founding Fathers thought was very important. Thank you.
I'm Paul Brown. I represent the 10th Congressional District of Georgia. Our second president, John Adams, said that our Constitution is written for moral and religious people. It's wholly inadequate for the governance of any other. Just a little over a century ago, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a unanimous decision, said that This is a Christian nation founded upon Christian principles. Every single member of Congress, every judge in this country swears to uphold the Constitution. This judge's ruling is totally unconstitutional, historically, as well as by the original intent of the Constitution. She's showing her arrogance, her ignorance, and her incompetence. Prayer has always been a fiber of our society. And prayer is extremely important for us to be able to go forward as a free people. This ruling is against freedom. It's for socialism. It's for what she is trying to establish her own religion of secular humanism and atheism. This ruling must not stand.
Jim Jordan from Ohio. Make no mistake about it, there is a struggle going on in our country over whose set of values, whose sets of principles are going to prevail. The secular left versus those of us who believe in Judeo-Christian tradition and heritage and truths that are part of that. And my concern is, if we don't prevail on the values debate, we may not have the toughness, the tenacity, what it takes to prevail on the other big challenges, the economic and financial concerns we face, the terrorist threat we face. It is really that important, and I think it's really that fundamental. And so I'm proud to join my colleagues for such a time as this, to stand up for those things that truly matter and truly make us the special nation that we are. Thank you.
I'm Todd T. Hart from the 4th District of Kansas. I'm very pleased to be here with my colleagues, acknowledging that we need to have prayer in our culture, in our society. Yesterday I introduced a resolution, H.R. Res. 1279, that recognizes the history of prayer in this country and encourages the administration to appeal this decision. It's been supported by Jay Sekulow and the ACLJ. But you know, if you go back to our history, in our nation's birthright, the Declaration of Independence, it says in the second paragraph, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Creator with a capital C, a supreme power that has given us creation. And prayer acknowledges that supreme power and advocates for its intervention in our lives. As people of faith, we live out our faith in this country. We are a country based on Judeo-Christian values, and you don't have to look very far to get evidence of it. You can look at Haiti, where we had such great intervention from America. You can look at the tsunami in Southeast Asia, where not only did taxpayers send $1 billion for the recovery of that area, but Americans dipped into their own pocket and sent another $1 billion. Following the scriptures where it says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Whatsoever you do to the least of these, you do unto me. Those scriptures are something that some would like to exclude from our culture, from our society. But it's our fiber. It is what we're made of. It's who we are, and we live it by living our faith. So I hope that we get this decision repealed and acknowledge this, the Creator with a capital C. God bless you all, and God bless America.
Michelle Bachman from Minnesota's 6th Congressional District. It seems like every time a federal district court judge opens up his court, we have a new constitutional convention that occurs. And that seems like what's happened now in the case of Judge Barbara Crabb. She's made a decision that seems on its face patently absurd, because what she is saying is that it's unconstitutional to put into effect the second half of the First Amendment, which denies Congress the right to prohibit the free exercise of religious faith. There's a balancing test that goes on in the First Amendment. Congress is not allowed to establish religion, which means we aren't going to have a national church, but the other side of that tension is that Congress can also not prohibit the free exercise of religion. People need to be able to have that right. And in what is simply an absurd decision, the judge seems to be outlawing the second half of the First Amendment, which means that government cannot prohibit people's free exercise of religion. So I think it's interesting what this decision is about, but again, the American people